Hey, yo, what's going on, guys? Got a brand new episode of Buyer Buzz for you guys today. Today, we're going to be talking about Jeff, the Baby Dolphin, the 2-cost, 2-powered Season Pass card, releasing on Tuesday, June 2nd, with the ability, your cards reveal here with +1 power, and this is movable one time. You know what's really cool about this card? So, of course, when you play a card here, it gets +1 power. Also, if a card just reveals, let's say a Nimrod gets destroyed and then generates on a Jeff, or a Broodling should generate on a Jeff, cards that reveal on this location should also get that +1 power. I know the Nimrods are for sure. I know a multiple man, when a multiple man moves to another location and then the copy goes back to the original on Proscenium, that copied multiple man gets that +1 power because it reveals back on that location with that +1 power, which should work the same way with Jeff, the Baby Dolphin. A little bit more of a niche interaction, but that is something that would work with this card, kind of just to keep the way like Proscenium kind of works, is kind of the similar way that Jeff is going to work for you as well. Of course, Proscenium is +2 power and Jeff is +1 power, but this card seems like it's going to be pretty good. As we go ahead and look at some of the key synergies for this card, it's something like a Maverick, of course, playing Maverick onto your Jeff lane. Also, if a card gets moved, like with a Juggernaut and lands onto that Jeff lane, it'll get that +1 power. I mean, you think of Maverick, you think of Captain Carter, you think of like an Agony, you think of like any of these cards where the base power are getting buffed so they can add that buff to another card. Seems pretty good. Another card like a Broodling is kind of that example, like I was talking about those Broodlings generating on something like a Proscenium. It's those cards revealing. So that's interesting. Of course, with the difference, I think, with the Broodling opposed to a Nimrod is that like the Nimrods are cards that genuinely generate there. So I'm not necessarily certain that the Broodlings will work that way. I know Multiple Man does work. I know Nimrod does work. I know cards that weren't played on Proscenium but revealed there do work, whereas token cards like, you know, Brood and something like a Sinister don't necessarily flip over. That's why I'm like, maybe they work on Proscenium, but it was more so like Brood with like the Maverick and those kind of just token cards in general is like the thought process there. And then of course we have something like a Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde's card you can play it repeatedly onto that Jeff lane, and it's not locked onto the location, whereas something like a Maverick is locked onto that Jeff lane and has to like kind of sit there. Kitty Pryde, you can sit there and then you can move Jeff and then play Kitty Pryde there as well. So you have that as kind of like an out opposed to just staying just there permanently like some of these other cards. As we do move on to some of the counters, though, of course, something like a Shadow King. I mean, simple as that. As you guys think, I'm looking all the way over here, but like the screen actually is over here. But something like a Shadow King is a card that has an immediate impact of this card because this is green power that can be reverted back to its original base power. Something like a Cosmic Ghost Rider, a Deafening Chord, Lady Deathstrike, Red Guardian are cards that, of course, can turn off Jeff's ability to be able to move and be able to continue to buff other cards. And then, of course, something like a Mercury. Mercury, of course, limits Jeff from being able to move from the location it was played at. As we look at the good for this card, every card that lands or is played in Jeff's lane gets that extra +1 power. So that's something that's really good, you know, about this card. It is movable. It's not just limited to that location for the entire game. Something like a, you know, a Hope Summers or like an Angela or like Athena or like any of those kind of cards are going to be stuck in that lane. Jeff moves over. He said, you know what? I gave enough power here. Let's go ahead and move to another lane. So that's something that's really cool to help you with like board clog and stuff. And it's a 2-cost. It's easy to play. It's flexible. It's got, you know, a high floor and a high ceiling. Like what you can do with this card, like the combos are just kind of crazy. Just in general, like I feel like adding power to a bunch of the cards, this is never just a 2-2. I feel like it's at least like a 2-3, 2-4, but I think it gets upwards to 2-10. Like it really just depends on exactly what cards are getting buffed. That, you know, that how they transmit power to other cards transfer, not transmit. So this card seems pretty decent so far. Now the bad for this card, of course, when you do look at it, it does have a low base power. So it itself is an easy target for those Deafening Chords, for those Red Guardians, for those Cosmic Ghost Riders not having priority potentially in that lane. Is it predictable? You know, your opponents see Jeff on the board. You're like, they're going to be playing cards in this lane. I can kind of play around that. So, you know, like your opponent's kind of going to get the general game plan of what you're trying to do. And is it a bad late draw? I mean, it is a 2 cost, so it is easy to play later into the game. But at the same time, is it worth playing that late into the game? Like, you got to kind of think about like some of that kind of like fundamentally am I getting enough benefit out of this if I don't have this earlier on in the game? As you move to the floor and the ceiling for this card, I do think, you know, on average, it'll be played out in 2 to 3 cards. Get that +1 power, so it could be a 2-4 to a 2-5 essentially. On the low end, the floor, you know, it's a bad late draw, and you only get 1 card buffed. It's a 2-3, which I guess that's like worst case scenario, which still isn't too bad for a 2-3. But I think on the top end, right, you end up buffing at least 4 cards, and they all get +1 power. So like that's 4 cards, and then that power can be transferable to another card, or it, you know, combos with something like a Venus, you know, like the Super Premium Season Pass card we'll be talking about in tomorrow's video. Like, they combo really well together, which, of course, I didn't have as a key synergy, but they are definitely, you know, key synergies with each other. But that's something to note in general, too, is, like, if this can buff 4 more cards, it's a 2-6, potentially adding even more power to other cards on the board. Like, there's a lot of really cool things you can do with this, and if, like, you fill one lane with 3 cards, you move to another lane, maybe get that to 3 cards. Like, there's a lot of, I think, really cool things and play patterns you can do with Jeff here, whereas when we look at these decks, we're bringing back Shuri Kitty, baby. We are bringing back Shuri Kitty. Originally, I had something like a Hulkbuster in this build and a Taskmaster, but talking with Dance and some other people, where we are playing Sholau again. But you might be like, why do you have Frigga in here? Dance originally asked me, he's like, why do you have Frigga in this list? And I was like, why not copy the big kitties? You know, you're not going to have priority, of course, going into like turn 6. But your opponents don't have to guess where are these kitties going with all that power. You also have Sholau as another option in order to add power to a card played last. Maybe it wasn't a kitty. Maybe you're adding that power to a Frigga, and then you have kitties to offset power elsewhere. Like, you have a variety of different options here, playing kitty into a Jeff, playing Angela into a Jeff lane, and then also Venus. So Venus with Jeff and with Angela, let's say, or just Venus with Angela, makes Angela get +2 power again. You guys remember +2 power Angela? Was a little crazy. They had to nerf her, make her a 2-3 +1. Do I think that's what's going to happen again? Probably not, but I think it works well in this style list. You're playing cards repeatedly into the same location, whether it's for a Hope Summers, whether it's for an Angela, whether it's for a kitty. And then you also can move Jeff over to do the Shuri Kitty thing. And you have a lot of just really cool ways to just offset and add a bunch of power everywhere, which is something that I really like, you know, with this style of list, and Venus adding additional buffs to cards. Like, this is great. You have Forge, you have Nico, you have Elsa. It's super greedy. It's a building kind of like a big kitty pride, but I think of like super greedy also at the same time as like when you're trying to build a big Deadpool, what is your payoff with that? You're trying to make a big Deadpool. You have like the Sholau Maverick style Deadpool decks. Maybe this is supposed to be a Sholau Maverick Kitty Pride deck instead, which probably is what it might end up translating into. Maybe you're dropping the Elsa for a Maverick kind of thing. Would not be super surprised there. And maybe you're dropping the Shuri into like a stick, you know, or maybe you're dropping the Shuri and Elsa for like a Vision and a Maverick. So like there's a couple different options of ways you can go with this list, but that's like my general gist of that. And then the next deck we have is something we've been kind of playing a bit recently. It's pretty much Stick Boom, which if you guys have seen, what was it, Thursday's video, where we posted that, it was like a more of a hand buff stick style deck. You have Jeff in this as well to be able to add power to your stick, to be able to add power to Clea, be able to add power, you know, to some of these cards to generate more power later on in the game, is kind of like the general thought process there, to be able to play out more of those cards. This deck feels pretty solid. Of course, you had Toxie Doxie in this list in the Jeff spot originally, and I think Jeff is like the perfect card in there instead of Toxie Doxie. It makes the card fundamentally better, or the deck fundamentally, I think, even better, because, you know, you're not going to hit something maybe you were trying to play out on curve, like you would with a Toxie Doxie. So I really like that, to be able to buff Clea on the board, buff Stick on the board to get additional power. Like, there's a lot of just really cool things that I do like with this list, and that's why I'm interested to see, like, with the Jeff interaction with, like, Mr. Sinister and, like, the Broodlings and stuff. If you do generate, you know, the Sinister clones and the Broodlings, let's say, on the far right location or far left location, and then you play them into the middle, like you Grandmaster the Mr. Sinister or, like, the Brood into the middle, is Jeff then going to give an additional +1 to the Broodlings and the Sinister clones that appear? It might not. I think I'm leaning more towards it probably does, but could totally be wrong there. But as we go to our next deck over here, we have Sneaky Movers. So originally, Jeff was in that Hydra Bob slot of this Derek mid-range mover deck that we made a video on a few weeks ago. That is still performing really well, but you have Jeff just to add additional power to some of these movers before they move, which is pretty good. And since Jeff can also move one time, you have Jeff to be able to move into additional locations, be able to move that into the Professor X lane. You're not worried about like how with Hydra Bob, it's like, can it be a 50-50? Which way is it going to go? Unless I fill specific lanes. I like that, as well as just adding the additional power to cards, is why I subbed Jeff into this deck as well. And then, of course, as we go for our ratings, I do think Jeff is a 5-star card. I haven't given a 5-star card out rating in, I think, quite a minute. But I think the functionality as a 2-cost card and what this card can do is absolutely incredible. Being able to also move and not be limited to that single location, the snowball effect, and the way we are in a buffing meta at the moment, and the way card order matters in a lot of these different games, I think Jeff allows you to give you that extra value to be able to do some just pretty crazy stuff, which I think is nothing to kind of scoff at here. And since it's not just cards played here, it's cards that are revealed here, I think that's also something that's very important, and that gives this card an even a niche benefit, a greater benefit too. It's fairly flexible as a 2-drop that also can move. You can play it in a variety of different decks to buff a variety of different cards. It's not just limited to buff decks. It's not just limited to move decks. Like, it's a 2-cost, well, like old Jeff, right? All right, I mean, I need a 2-cost to play. I'm just going to put Jeff in here. Like, this kind of feels like that, but it has more benefits than just you can play this into any location. This is movable, so you can move it into pretty much any location. So that's something I really like about this card. Will be adjusted. Maybe if it's too strong, it goes to a 2-1. That's what I think would probably happen. Or if they think it's too weak, it goes to a 2-3. I think if anything, it goes to like a 2-1. I don't think it goes to a 3-cost. Maybe. I think that's pushing it way too much. But I think it would maybe go to a 2-1 as like the first thing that would probably happen. But Jeff is a buy. A season pass is almost always a buy. And I think Jeff is no exception. I think this card's going to be incredible. I think this card's going to be great. I think a lot of my takes too is also with having KM on the app this past week opened my eyes to a lot of stuff with this card. And just like ideas fundamentally, and also playing the game, looking at the scope of the meta, this card is going to be very, very good. So definitely I would suggest buying Jeff. But at the end of the day, you know, guys, we are still playing card game where our resources are still limited. And this costs real money. This is not just in-game currency that you can just, you know, use to buy the season pass. So you're spending your own hard-earned dollars or someone else's hard-earned dollars on this card. So, you know, just kind of keep that in mind when you do play this, or if you do want to buy this. If not, you do need to wait an entire month until it is in seasonal snap packs. But at the end of the day, guys, you know, if you want to spend money on this game, spend money on this game. I mean, you get to choose what you want to do with your money, and whatever brings you joy, do what brings you joy. And, you know, we don't have an OTA, I think, for another, like, week or 2 weeks. I think it's more so like 2 weeks. So keep in mind the meta we have right now definitely leans into what Jeff does. And the meta currently is kind of in that kind of sense. So kind of, you know, keep that in mind. Also, if you're trying to be more like meta, you know, relevant, kind of, I think this card's going to be very meta relevant. So keep that in mind, just not because it's a season pass card, because it's good, and because of all the buffs and stuff that this card enables. We're in a big buff meta, so I kind of just keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, guys, you know, good cards get nerfed, bad cards get buffed, bad cards get nerfed, and good cards get buffed. So it kind of can go both ways. We had kind of an kind of, you know, OTA, you know, a couple weeks ago, I guess a week ago now. So it's interesting to kind of see where we're at now. But I do suggest buying Jeff. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, definitely feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you're new. Let me know if I'm wrong about Jeff, or if there's any other interactions or cards that you guys think might synergize very well with Jeff. It's been real. God bless, and Tucker out.